Okay, let's look at our lab book, exercise 30 and 31. So again, they talk about arteries and blood vessels here at the beginning. Remember, arteries are taking blood away from the left side of the heart out to all of the body, right there. Again, the pulmonary circulation is very short. You can bring blood into that right pump on the right side of the heart. You're going to go up through the pulmonary trunk, pulmonary arteries to the lungs, back through the pulmonary veins to the left side of the heart. So again, nothing much to pulmonary circulation, but then your systemic circulation is where almost all arteries and veins are at. Arteries, again, take out high oxygen, low carbon dioxide blood out to all the tissues. And as we said, when you first leave the heart, you're running to the very large elastic arteries, then the medium-sized muscular arteries, then the arterioles to the capillaries. And then, of course, on the way back, you come through venules, small, medium, large veins, all the way back to the right side of the heart. But right up here, they show you how there's three tunics or layers in the wall of a blood vessel. Again, tunic means layer. We've looked at layers of other things, same thing right here. So the tunica adventitia is also called the tunica externa because it is the external outside layer. What's there primarily is a dense collagenous connective tissue layer, so it's like a thick, tough skin around the outside of that blood vessel. To the middle is the tunica media. Now this middle layer is where most all the smooth muscle is at. Remember, in the wall of blood vessels, especially arteries, there's a large amount of smooth muscle. That way that muscle can constrict or relax to dilate and open it up. That greatly changes blood flow to a tissue. And then we have the tunica intima. Well, there's your very inner layer, the layer that the blood actually comes in contact with. And mostly what's in that tunica intima is the endothelium. That is an inner epithelial layer that covers and lines the inside of all blood vessels. You get to a capillary, that's the only thing left. There's nothing else superficial to it at a capillary, and the endothelium is always a simple squamous epithelial cell layer. So right below right here they show an artery on one side of this histology slide, and here's a vein on the other. And you can easily tell this is the artery and that's the vein, because look at how thick the wall is on that artery. Remember, arteries are under high pressure, so they need a big, thick, tough wall. Look at how thin it is on that vein. Great comparison between artery and vein. And if we look closer at the inner wall of that artery, you can see how it's very folded and wavy. That shows there was a lot of room for expansion on the inside, but of course at the moment there's no pressure inside that at all right there, so just shows how it's wavy, had a lot of room for expansion on the artery. So if we zoom all the way back out right there, here we have a picture of the entire human body. It shows a lot of the major arteries. So let's start at the heart, and let's go out, say, to any finger in your right hand. Now let's look at the correct sequence of arteries. First you got your aorta. Then follow that out, you're going to have the brachiocephalic artery. That's going to lead to the subclavian, to the axillary, to the brachial. And then remember, radial is lateral to the outside. It's going to be thumb side when you're in the anatomic position. And ulnar artery be medial to the inside. Then palmar in the palm of the hand, digital in the fingers. So follow that again. You got the aorta. Then from there you got the brachiocephalic, subclavian, axillary, brachial, radial, ulnar, palmar, digital. So that's if you left the heart, went to any finger in your right hand. Now let's go back to the heart and look at this aorta. Now remember, the aorta has several sections to it. The first piece is real short, just an inch or two long. It's what's called the ascending aorta. And the two coronary arteries are what come off of it, and that's what nourishes blood to the cardiac muscle itself. But then after the ascending aorta, we have the aortic arch, which you can see they labeled. Now that's where it makes a 180-degree bend or turn. Now let's look at the three major arteries coming off the aortic arch. The first one, which goes towards the upper right part of your chest, is the brachiocephalic artery. Then in the middle is the left common carotid, coming up the left side of your neck. And then there's the left subclavian, coming towards this left upper limb. And if you left the heart and went to any finger in your left upper limb, say any finger over here in your left arm, the sequence would be the same as what it is over here, except there's no brachiocephalic to the left. You do have that to the right, but not one of those to the left. Now here's our left common carotid. Now the right common carotid comes off this brachiocephalic, but you can't see it in the picture. But there's a right and left common carotid, what comes up either side of your neck. Just before you get to the angle of the mandible on each side is where the common carotid splits. There's a thick spot called the carotid sinus. You want to find a pulse on somebody, just inferior to the angle of the mandible on either side is a good place to find one. But again, right there is where the common carotid splits. Each one on both sides of the neck splits into an internal and external carotid. The two internal carotids are the two biggest flows of blood to the brain. The external carotids take blood to everything around the brain. I'm talking about skull, muscle, and skin. But back over here to the other side, let's go back to the aorta. Again, there's ascending aorta. Then there's aortic arch, and then there's the descending. And the descending aorta has two sections to it. Now remember that the diaphragm muscles, what your heart and lungs rest right on top of. So everything from the bottom of this arch down to that muscle would be the thoracic aorta, because that's the piece in the thoracic cavity. As soon as you go through that diaphragm muscle, now you got abdominal aorta. So again, there's ascending aorta, aortic arch, thoracic, and abdominal. And again, thoracic, abdominal are just two pieces of the descending aorta. But back off to the side right here, they show the pulmonary trunks, what your right ventricle pushes blood into. And right here are the pulmonary arteries, right? You can see them left and right. They didn't label them. Coronaries we saw previously back on the heart. Then there's the thoracic aorta. It's actually the very bottom of the thoracic aorta there. Splenic arteries going to go to your spleen. Celiac trunk goes out to stomach and other internal organs. Renal, go to the kidneys. There's two kidneys, two renal arteries, right and left. The mesenterics go out to the digestive system. And then there's that abdominal aorta we mentioned before. So remember, the blood flow's going away from the heart. Well, we started at the heart right here. So right around L2 at your second lumbar is where that abdominal aorta splits. So if you follow these splits from the abdominal aorta, first you got external iliacs. Keep going down towards the toe. Common iliacs. Common iliacs are going to become the external. Then you got femoral and deep femoral. Popliteal behind the knee. Fibular artery is lateral to the outside. Anterior posterior tibial to the inside. Dorsalis pedis in your ankle. Digital in your toes. So let's again come up here to the heart. If you want to look at blood leaving the heart going to a toe, here's your sequence. We'll go through the aorta, and again we're going to skip all these others because that blood's not going to your toe. So you go through the aorta, then you got common iliac, external iliac, femoral and deep femoral, popliteal, fibular, your two tibial, anterior and posterior, again fibulars to the outside, two tibial, medial to the inside, dorsalis pedis in the ankle, digital in the toes. It wouldn't matter which toe you went to in either lower limb, it would be the same. And something else we had up here, the internal iliacs, there they have them labeled here, those go into the pelvic cavity. But again, we were going towards the toes, that's why we skipped them in our sequence just before. Look at this actual picture of the heart, and look at how big and wide that aorta is. And look at that, there's those three branches off the arch, just as they should be. Here again, you can see a little bit of the ascending aorta, aortic arch, and there'd be your thoracic piece and part of the abdominal right there below it. Here's a cadaver. You can see the heart, and looks like the anterior descending or interventricular artery right here. There again is that aorta. Look at how big and wide that thing is, and there's those three big old branches, just as you would expect to see. So here's the right upper limb. Again, if we left your heart and went towards any finger in your right upper limb, you'd first go through the aorta. Don't forget the aorta is always first, unless you go into the lungs. Then there's that brachiocephalic. Then you have subclavian, axillary, brachial, radial, ulnar, palmar, digital. And again, if you went towards any finger in your left upper limb, left hand, it'd be the same sequence except no brachiocephalic. Here again is a good view of the right side of the neck. Now again, there's your right common carotid. And again, just before the angle of the mandible, it splits. Thick spot called the carotid sinus. Good place to find a pulse right there. But again, each one of those right and left common carotids split. So you've got right and left internal carotids and external. So each common splits into an internal and an external. Again, the two internal carotids, right and left, biggest inflows to your brain. But back here, when you look at the cervical vertebrae, there's two vertebral arteries, one on the right and another one over on the left. So the two internal carotids and the two vertebral arteries are the big flows of blood to your brain. That's the four big ones. Then the external carotids come up to everything around your brain, the skull, the muscle, and the skin. And here you can actually see some of this in here. Right there is where that carotid artery splits into that internal and external. So good little view of those right there. Look at these on the brain. We're not going to worry about all these, but these 4 big flows of blood to your brain all come together in this little circular area called the cerebral arterial circle. And then from there, all these mini arteries go out to the different parts of the brain. So there's another look at the aorta, ascending, aortic arch, and descending. Here's the diaphragm muscle, so we're down inferior to it. So there's the abdominal aorta. There are your kidneys, or the renal arteries going to them. The long thin ones here are the gonadal arteries. It's going to go to the gonads, ovaries, and testes. And then again, if you follow this abdominal aorta down, common iliacs are left and right. That splits into externals, and there are those little internals going into the pelvic cavity. Going down to one of your toes, again, we'd have the aorta. So there we come down to common iliac, external iliac, femoral and deep femoral, popliteals always behind your knee. Then again, the fibular arteries lateral to the outside, and your anterior and posterior, meaning front and back of the tibia, or medial to the inside, dorsalis pedis in the ankle, digital in the toes. And here they show some atherosclerotic plaque. Again, that's the fatty stuff builds up in the arteries, and look at how it narrows them right there. Very bad thing, because again, really everything in the body is going to get a lot less blood flow at that time. So there are our major arteries from the pictures in our lab book.